Welcome to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we equipped you to more effectively lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. Each week, we help you sharpen your leadership acumen by cracking open the playbooks of dynamic leaders who are doing big things in their professional endeavors. And now your host, leadership tactics and organizational development expert, Karen Farrell Rhodes.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the podcast. And thanks for joining another episode designed to help you better lead at the top of your game. Now, as you know, for season 3, each month we're featuring leaders who have fascinating roles in a particular profession or industry. And today's episode is part of our special series featuring leaders who focus on fostering inclusive workplaces. And now, enjoy the show.
Hey there, superstars. This is Karen, and welcome back to another episode of the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast. Now, if you looked at this podcast episode, you might have thought your eyes were deceiving you, but nope, not so much. We do have back a beloved supporter of the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast and a guest that was on episode 21. Of the podcast. So he's been a longtime friend and supporter, Dr. Steve Yacovelli, who is the CEO of TopDog Learning Group, which is a learning and development, change management, and inclusion consulting firm. He was absolutely awesome, and we laughed the whole time together while still talking about some great things and giving you all great tips. And he was so great that when we found out that he was publishing a second book, we tried to grab him before he blew up and been too big for us to have for you all to hear. So definitely we want to re-welcome to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, Dr. Steve. So welcome back.
Thank you, Karen. I'm so happy to be back and hanging with you again and your peeps. It's so fun.
It is. It was so much fun. And I didn't want to tell too much about your book because I didn't want to steal your thunder. I'm super excited about it being published and the resources that you're providing directly to folks who have a lot of questions. And I'm going to let you unveil your area of specialty and what you do, because we have a lot of new listeners since the last time you were on. But before we do that, for as much as you feel comfortable, can you give us an update on your, personal life and passions these days?
Yeah, thank you for that. So hello, everyone. Welcome. Glad to be back, I should say. Again, Dr. Steve Yacovelli, pronouns he, him, and his. Am the owner and principal / CEO of TopDog Learning Group. We are a leadership, change management, and diversity inclusion consulting firm, as Karen had already said. But I'm also known as the gay leadership dude. And so right there, automatically know 3 things about me: that I'm gay, that I self-identify as a dude, and I really like to talk leadership, which of course is why I'm excited to be here. Since the last time I was on episode 21, things have been kind of rocking and rolling, keeping the doghouse open. We have multiple members of our pack, as I like to say, who are client partners, and top doggers who are consultants. Yeah, it's a whole branding thing, my friends. Really been working a lot now that people are actually going back into the classroom, going back into conference spaces. We've been doing kind of a bit of stuff on the road. And then, as Karen alluded to, and I'm sure we'll talk about later, kind of working on another book. And we're actually launching our own podcast in addition to some other fun product-y things that we're doing to make the world a bit more inclusive and smarter leaders throughout.
That is absolutely fantastic. And I can't wait to see the unveiling of all the great offerings that you are doing. And I'm about ready to add you to my podcast playlist as soon as you launch so I can listen while I work out. So super excited about that as well. So, gosh, we could just go a little bit of everywhere. But before we go into the book, let's start about some of the complex environment and dynamics that are really going on in the inclusion space right now. It's, as you know, it's a topic that is extremely necessary and critical for both business and individual success. But, it's kind of painted or tainted, if you will, a little bit with all the geopolitics that are going on. So I just love to hear from your perspective the kind of the state of DEI and inclusion these days.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Karen. And it's funny because just this morning, as I was at the gym, listening to no lie, we didn't set this
No,
up,
we
friends. We're
didn't.
both here. I love National Public Radio. This is not an endorsement. I don't get a kickback, but I absolutely love NPR. And I was listening to the Marketplace Morning Report. And if you're not familiar with that, friends, if you want to be kind of a pulse on the business world, it's fantastic. And they do like a 30-minute one, at least in my local area, that's broadcast at the evening. And in the morning, they do like a 10-minute kind of update. And it just so happened today, while I'm doing my little stair-stepping thing, they were talking about this new study that was just published today by the Corporate Diversity Initiatives. Was it the national? It's a new national survey. It just came out, and they were saying how looked at all these business executives, and they said how, while of course you see in the headlines, workplaces are quote unquote pulling back their DE&I efforts. And this study said, no, actually, that's not really true. And that reading the statistic right from, so if you see my eyes move, I'm looking at my thing. According to the data, 75% of executives who describe themselves as politically conservative said diversity initiatives are essential for their business strategy. And then they combine that with a very recent study done by McKinsey, where they found that 36% or companies that engage in diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives are 36% more successful. So business executives, smart business executives at least, aren't saying that it's not the performative thing. Let's rainbow wash our logo in June for Pride and all the other stuff that we can do. It's, what, this bit makes business sense. And quite frankly, that's what all of us D&I folks have been saying for a long
Forever,
time.
right?
Forever. This is not new, but yet another study that just came out, which is fantastic, that shows exactly that it's, yes, it's the right thing to do. At least that's what I personally think. And I think a lot of folks listening will probably agree with that, but it's the right business thing to do. And that's where we need, as D&I practitioners, need to keep focusing the energy there. And I know I do that with our inclusive leadership programs that we give to client partners. That's always what we lead with, is this is better for your bottom line. And yes, it makes the world better too.
It sure does. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that research studies and those statistics, because, there's a lot that's going on. Where I found is that employers, and I agree, employers aren't, although, it's always in the news and what have you, but employers aren't pulling back. They're just trying to infuse it more smartly into their businesses. So they're more focused on that, making that business impact versus trying to be on any political side, right, wrong, or
100%.
indifferent. And that's what
Yep.
we're seeing. I don't know if you're seeing the same.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're actually seeing some of the D&I efforts are moving away from HR and actually into either strategy or into legal or
Yes.
both.
Yes.
And that's okay. I'm like, hey, as long as it's there, I don't really care who owns it.
Yeah, but I want it
But
done right, though, Steve. Yeah.
100%,
Right.
absolutely. And I'm happy to say that as we've been in this space, and I've personally been in it for almost 30 years, my business has been around. Our Sweet 16 was just a week ago.
Woo!
Woohoo! Yeah,
Congratulations.
16 years I've been doing this as my full-time gig. And we've always taken the stance of let's create consciously inclusive leaders. And I know in episode 21, I described, how I got to that point. It was when I was at Disney and that fun stuff. And other people use that phrasing too. But if we're being smart about creating diverse and equitable spaces in our workplace, we want to do it from a conscious inclusion perspective. And really, at the end of the day, it's about creating that sense of belonging for every employee. So it's not about like what numbers I have, which, and I know there's lots of conversations we can have on all the quota things and all that weird stuff that's going on. But at the end of the day, how does an individual employee feel? And that's the smart strategy, because if I feel that I belong, I feel safe, I feel heard, I feel respected, guess what level of input I give to the workplace? A lot. And studies have shown that again, time and again. So it's not just it's better for the bottom line, but you're getting better performance when people feel that sense of belonging. And that's the strategy that companies should be facing when it comes to creating diverse and equitable spaces.
Oh, I so agree. We could almost drop the mic there, but there's too much other good stuff that you have to share. But that was eloquently said. So perfect. Well, let's jump into your new book. First of all, can you share the title? Tell us how it came about and what's the difference you're trying to make in the world with it.
So if you're watching, this is the cover. Da, 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 We've actually had the cover for a little while.
Nice.
So the newest book is called Your Queer Career: Workplace Advice from the Gay Leadership Dude. So you already know I wrote it because it's the Gay Leadership Dude, but it kind of came out because of my students. And so when my previous book, Pride Leadership, which also is on the screen, Pride Leadership: Strategies for the LGBTQ plus leader to be the king or queen of their jungle, that came out, no pun intended, but that came out in 2019. And I wrote it like a textbook. And so one of the things that we did with it was create an online queer and ally leadership training program that uses the Pride Leadership as the textbook. And that was always the strategy. There's always the idea. And we've had hundreds and hundreds of queer leaders from around the globe go through it, lots of allies too. It's just been really, really exciting. And during that 8-module program, there's one-on-one coaching sessions that they get, usually with me or one of my teammates. And people would ask questions, and I kind of started writing them down, of course, respecting the person and not disclosing who they were, but it'd be questions like, so, hey, Steve/Gay Leadership Dude, I think my boss is homophobic. What should I do? And so I would start to think like, well, gosh, what would I do in that situation? And so that kind of led to writing a column for a couple magazines and some newspapers. And then I worked with each of those publishers and said, hey, can I still own this intellectual property? Like, absolutely, just acknowledge us, whatever you do with it. So I started collecting them, and that's what Your Queer Career is about, where Pride Leadership is about the leadership philosophy and strategy to be a more effective leader, gay or not, but it's usually for queer folks. Your Queer Career is answering those questions in a mindful manner. And as you might have recalled, if you were watching or listening to episode 21, it kind of aligned with Karen's awesome 7 leadership
Tactics.
skills. We focus on 6 within both Pride Leadership as well as Your Queer Career. It's, authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture. And so how we organize Your Queer Career is through these exact six lenses as well. And so there's a chapter on the questions that have to deal with being authentic in the workplace. There's a chapter on, questions that relate to having empathy and et cetera, et cetera. So Your Queer Career, and I'm really excited for it because, and I even talked to my publisher, I'm like, this could just be volume 1. She's like, I think you're onto something there. So I suspect, we have a production schedule, if you will. Pride Leadership gets a refresh probably next year because, 2019, it's been a while. The world is very
Yes,
different since
I
2019.
know.
2018 is when I wrote it. So, and then, after that, then it's probably going to be Your Queer Career volume 2 or whatever that looks like. We'll just see how the cards play out.
Yeah. Just stay open to what it can be, you don't have to define it now. That's fantastic. So, what were some of your big insights that came out of your career of where people were either getting stuck, or what trends did you see? What kind of came out of those
Yeah,
questions?
it's a couple things jumped out at me as I was assembling all the pieces and parts to Your Queer Career. One was that there is definitely a lot more folks who feel disjointed from their workplace values, between the stated values on the website or in the break room and the real lived values within wherever they worked within the business. And so that popped up a bunch of times, which I thought was really interesting and quite challenging, and kind of makes me understand why only about 50% of LGBTQ folks are out at work in the US. So it's still hovering at that
Really,
level.
50%?
Still 50%. And you can look at data. I was looking, matter of fact, for this book, I was researching because I cite a study in Pride Leadership. I'm like, I wonder if it's been updated or if it's changed. And the latest research still says it's still hovering around 50%, give or take a few numbers. So why is that? And a lot of it is the workplace values versus the real values versus what's stated or kind of expected. So that was one big jumping out point. And I think the other two is how, and I say this, and I know we talked about this in episode 21,
Oh, just spit it
how
out.
no. But I was thinking, like, I mean, I'm in my 50s, and you forget as you progress through your profession and your your journey in your workplace or whatever, you forget what you know. And so when I would hear these questions, I'm like, why don't you know that? And it's not just, it wasn't me being arrogant, but it's one of those things like, oh my gosh, I forgot I learned that lesson. Let me share it with you. And that's kind of one of the things that I really liked about this was, even regardless of how length of time someone spent in their career, there was always something that they're like, oh, I learned that many, many, many years ago. I forgot. I'm like, perfect. Then now here's a reminder. Or someone who's shiny new out of the wrapper is like, I just entered the workforce. Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing that brand new wisdom with me. I don't know that. And so kind of thinking about how people are approaching their career a bit differently was also the big thing that jumped out at me for this.
Wow. I'm still going back to my mind is spinning around that figure. What is it? Only about 50% of people are out at work. That really hit me. And I'm wondering, is there a tie to that and length of retention for career professionals if they don't find a work environment where they are comfortable in being their whole selves? Are they looking for greener pastures elsewhere, which fold into the whole talent challenge that employers are
Absolutely. I mean,
facing?
you see this, I mean, and even now, and sorry to cut you
No,
off,
no,
Karen,
no,
but
go ahead.
even now, like COVID is like this big giant equalizer to some folks. Now, obviously, not every job,
Sure.
but so many folks, COVID happened. Where did the work environment go? Of course, it went online as best as it could. Obviously, not
Right.
everybody. So now the dust has settled and COVID is quote unquote over or whatever that means these days. But now you have folks who are able to work remotely. And so I'm not tied to whatever company's in my backyard. And so that retention of talent or potential retention of a talent is now it's amped up exponentially for any
Yeah.
workplace. Because if I want to keep my best talent, I have to engage them. I have to create that sense of belonging we talked about before. And if I'm a queer person and I don't feel that sense of belonging, it's so much easier for me to pick up my toys and go elsewhere, virtually or physically or both. And I think smart workplaces know that and are starting to think, wait a minute, what are we doing or not doing to keep folks where we want them to be and engage them, keep that sense of belonging and empower them to remain here versus alienate them because we're doing performative allyship. If you're not familiar with that term, that's where folks pretend to be allies and then they really aren't. It's the rainbow washing in June, and then July walks around and like, here's money to that anti-queer political candidate, and kind of things like that truly always happen.
Sure.
So it's not doing that. And people are too savvy now. People know when that performative allyship is part of the workplace. I know the last episode we talked about it quite a bit. And even since then, you have some of these great brands who claim to be awesome super allies, and then they had a lot of missteps over the past
Yes.
year or
Oh my
so. And
gosh. It littered our news in culture media, right? This past year
yep,
or a couple years,
yep.
actually. Wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But I think if we're trying to retain the best talent, whether it be your workers of color or female colleagues, or insert any of the other disenfranchised folks here, if we're being smart about it as leaders, we want to create that sense of belonging. And how do we do that? We're being consciously inclusive in the mix.
No, absolutely. And Steve, I'm really curious, how do you see the role of employee resource groups for those who aren't familiar with the term? How do you see the role of these evolving over these past couple years, and where do you see them going? Are they still valuable? Are they not? What's your thoughts on those?
So, just for the listeners and the watchers, we didn't plan this, but that's literally one of the questions that's in your queer
Oh,
career.
really?
Was yeah, no lie, because it's a very very valid question.
Yeah.
Do ERGs or affinity groups or BRGs or insert whatever you want to call? If you're not familiar with those terms, it's a group of like demographic employees at a business. So it could be the queer folks, it could be the veterans, it could be the
Could be the
parents, it could be the
women.
women,
Yeah.
the color, it could be insert any of others here. And so what I'm seeing is a couple things, and it's where it's starting to differentiate. Smart businesses are using their employee resource groups as basically internal consultants if they're smart. So I'll just take the queer folks or the LGBT ERGs. In some companies, they're like, "Yay, you put on the Pride Parade events and get our logo out there." Where yeah, that's nice, and that gives brand awareness and shows inclusivity to some extent. But smarter businesses are saying, "Hey, there's this legislation out there. How is it impacting you and your world? And what should we do? Should we write an amicus brief?" Which, if you're not familiar, is like, where a company says, "Dear Supreme Court or whomever, this is what we think on this
Right.
stance." And also, ERGs are now doing that and pushing their employers to say, "Hey, this is happening. What are you doing?" And I can say this, and I'm not affiliated anymore with the Walt Disney Company. I am a former Disney cast member. I sit in Central Florida. You saw this happen. And employee research groups, both in Florida and California, pushed the company and said, "Wait a minute. What's going on here? What are you doing? You're supposed to be inclusive. This is not what's going to happen." And smart businesses are like, "Wow, you're right." Disney said, "Wow, you're right." I mean, to the to the point where they had very senior executive
Yeah.
change they're after some of these things.
Yeah.
And that's a company that's trying to do it right and walk the walk and talk the talk. And so I think employee resource groups can be that catalyst for change internally, but a business should be using them as internal experts and subject matter experts and resources instead of just the party planners and yay, it's blank month and let's celebrate stuff.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm curious, how did you say you got some of the questions that you were answering in your book? How did you gather those again?
So some of them, we just put a website out, and all of our social media posts and all that stuff be like, hey, you got a question for the gay leadership dude? Here you go. And so we got a couple that way, actually. But a lot of them were through our coaching clients or people who are in the LGBT leadership program that we did. It's called the Lions program. See, it's like Pride Leadership, Lions,
Look
get it,
at
friends.
you.
And
So
Lions, I know, right?
busy.
But Lions actually is an acronym, and it stands, actually, I can show you, I think. Oh, whoa, it's on here. All right. And it stands for a leader's immersive opportunity to nurture strengths. So Lions, Lions.
Love it.
And so the idea is that people come into this program, they're already leaders. I mean, if you're listening, all y'all are leaders. That's kind of what we say here in the South, because you're having influence. That's leadership is all
That's
about.
right.
And you're listening to this podcast. Hello, you clearly identify as a leader. So there you go. Hello. But what we do is we take that experience and then we channel it to be even more effective. And that's kind of where the Lions program, and that's where a lot of the questions did come out, with people asking it either in the one-on-one coaching sessions or in our virtual classroom sessions where there's a whole bunch of folks from around the world. And I would just got smart finally and was like, ooh, let me write that down. That's a good one. Or I'd hear it 3 times. I'm like, ooh, that's a trend. So I kind of write it down and let's answer that one and see what happens.
Awesome. The reason I asked you that is because I know there are a lot of folks that, may not have or just are coming familiar with you now that I'm sure have questions as well. And I know that part of some of your future plans are to provide avenues where people can ask those questions, and you can work either through the podcast or include it in the next book or something to try to get answers out to the public. So if people have additional questions that they would love to send to you to consider for an upcoming episode, a podcast episode, or in your next book, how can they give those or to you or send them to you?
We have actually website already set up, so we'll put that in the show
Okay,
notes.
wonderful.
And it's really where all things your queer career will be housed. Right now we're doing the pre-launch and things, and we're also doing our podcast when it comes on, as we mentioned, which is also going to be called Your Queer Career, the podcast.
Nice.
There's a newsletter that we have that goes out. We're moving it from weekly to bi-weekly just now on LinkedIn that you can subscribe to. And so all of those are kind of the ways that we're trying to infiltrate in a good way your queer career into the atmosphere.
Yes. I love that. I love that. What advice do you have for your clients who still are facing microaggressions in the workplace, or they notice microaggressions in the workplace and want to be a better ally? What do you share in your advice area in your book about that? Because those are still going on. I keep hearing them still from, a lot of people in the workforce right now.
Karen and I talked about this before we got on the air, and I'm like, I don't want to repeat myself from the other episode, but I'm repeating.
Yes.
I'm going to own it and repeat it. So if you heard this already, we're going to talk about Mop Sam real quick. In episode 21, that was one of the questions, and I gave a very real story, and as you might remember, Karen, happened in your backyard in the Atlanta area, where I was in this client site. We were about to do this big meeting. It was like a rah-rah. We were at the end of the change management thing. And the senior executive at the head of the table, and his gender is important to the story, just as we're about to start the meeting, and you hear him say, well, you know how all women drive. And and you remember that, and you had the beautiful shocked look if you're watching the video from that one. And so at that moment, no one said a word, and we all engaged in silent collusion. So here's a microaggression that just happened against women. And at the moment when none of us said anything to refute the statement, we were engaging in silent collusion. We were silently agreeing or supporting that in this case, quite frankly, stupid statement that was said. So we developed, and it's also in Pride Leadership, but it's also in Your Queer Career, the idea of MOPSAM. And MOPSAM is just 6 ways that you can remember what to do in the moment to refute silent collusion and really start to address some of those microaggressions as they are live and in the moment. And I won't go through all 6. Again, in the show notes, we'll put we have a free training we give folks for this one. It's, it's pretty simple. It's not crazy, but each of the MOPSAM, MOPSAM, and I use this cheeky little thing where it's Sam the dog, and Sam is a Hungarian pulley mop. So Sam's name and his breed, MOPSAM, that's where this all comes from. So if you're seeing the video, you're like, what's the deal with the dog besides
The
dog?
cute dog.
That's Sam, and he's a mop dog. So anyway, it's a way to remember. It's silly, but humans need some pneumatic way to memory pulling.
Yep.
So that's where Mop Sam comes in. And so basically, it's 6 strategies that in that moment you can do as a leader to kind of refute those microaggressions, those micro inequities that are being said. So it's me, outpoint, say, ask, move. And like I said, I encourage you to go to the free training, but I will jump into 2 of them that I find to be the most valuable. And I'm going to jump around here. The first one I'm going to do is actually the A in Mop Sam, kind of toward the end. And it's you ask. You actually ask the person what they meant. And so in this case, Bob, we'll pretend Bob was the executive. I might say, Bob, what did you mean by that statement? That you know how all women drive. Now, you have to be very mindful on how you ask the question, because it's not like, Bob, what did you mean by that statement? Bob's, your tone and intonation, rate of speech is communicating something beyond the words. So, neutral tone, Bob, what did you mean by that statement? And then you sit and think, and you let Bob kind of stew or share. Because typically what's happening when someone engages in microaggressions, they're coming from that unconscious behavior, the unconscious bias that's out there. And so when you ask the question, it pushes people right into the consciousness, like, ooh, I have to stop and think of what I said. Ooh. And just like in this exact situation, Bob backpedaled, I didn't mean it, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's fine. So 2 things happened there. I addressed it with Bob, but I sent a message to every other person in that room that I'm not on board with Bob. I'm sorry. What did you mean by that statement? So that's kind of the A in Mop Sam. And the other one that I love is the S in Sam, Mop Sam, is you say a non-word that at least indicates you're not on board. And it could be like, what? Whoa, damn, huh? So if I say something like that, you're a women drive, whoa, what message did I just send in that
Right.
moment?
Like
Not
not
on
on
board.
board. Yeah.
Bad part, though, is I'm not addressing it immediately with Bob. And so all of the 6 strategies have pros and cons, which is why I encourage you to kind of go through the little bit of training there. But if we, as smart leaders, don't let these microaggressions sit and fester, where we at least address them in a whoa, say a non-word, or more importantly, hey, what did you mean by that statement? And then be quiet, we could really go far in beating that silent collusion in the workplace.
Absolutely. Definitely go and check the show notes to get the free training, because he goes really in depth on all 6, and he makes it real. It's very easy for you to use, and it's a great hack to have in your hip pocket. So when you're facing that, you can tactfully address it and be supportive to others around the room without bringing a ton of negativity. It's just a bit of awareness and being in the moment for them to course correct. And for those who are new to Dr. Steve here, in our first episode, we always usually ask about our tactics, but he did select leading with courageous agility, if I remember correctly, as being
Very
the
good,
tactic
yeah.
that really resonated with him. So I wanted to bring that back up. And as you all know, leading with courageous agility is all about having the courage and fortitude to stand up for what you think is right and take baby steps forward, even if the future is unclear or uncertain. And so if you want to just remind us, Steve, why that really is kind of evident based on the work and your passion and what you do. But I'd love for you to give voice to this again, of why it kind of popped for you, for our new listeners who have not met you yet.
Yeah, and I love how, Karen, your areas of focus kind of so
Full
aligned with my
overlap.
6. I love that. We talked about that last time. I
Yeah.
think it's so awesome. Because and that just kind of speaks to what really is important in the workplace
Right.
to be a more effective leader. Whether you parse it with 6 or 7, it's these same
That's
concepts,
right.
and for me, it's authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture. And all of them to me are make or break a really effective leader. But I always go to the courage one, because I think in this day and age, in the workplace that it is now, whether you're hybrid, in person, virtual, being courageous makes a difference. And whether it's refuting those statements that we just talked about with silent collusion and having the courage to kind of put yourself out there, or if you're kind of silently in the background doing your work but making decisions that maybe are harder, or asking the right questions that might take you in a different direction than maybe you expected. And especially when you talk about trying to be more innovative, trying to ask, well, why are we doing it this way? That takes courageous behavior. It's not just, courage in the workplace is not like the superhero, Wonder Woman kind of thingy. It's being yourself. It's asking those questions. It's having those tough conversations. And all of that makes a difference into not only your leadership effectiveness, but how much you cater and foster trust with those around you, which, as we all know, is really the key to effective
It
leadership.
absolutely is. It absolutely is. Well, thank you again for sharing that with us. Now, by the time this episode comes out, I believe your book will be launched and published. So we'll have,
Better.
cross our fingers, we'll have links to everything that we'll reach back out and make sure we have all the links updated for the show notes by the time the launch happens. But definitely make sure, listeners, that you check out the show notes to get the link to Steve's former book, Pride, and Pride Leadership. There we go. And his new book, Your Career, as well as links to the podcast and all of the resources that he is going to be able to provide. So before we let you go, Steve, any last thoughts? Anything you'd love to share?
I loved how the last time we had a chat, Karen, that I was able to turn the tables on you, and I'm going to do it again.
Okay.
But so, I mean, it's been almost a
It
year to
has.
the recording, just about.
Yeah.
And I want to ask, what's one thing that you're so happy has changed for you in the last year?
On a personal or professional level?
You interpret how you will.
I'll share on a personal level. Even though I, live and breathe leadership every day in, day out, I'm not perfect. And so one of the things that I'm proud of is that I've consciously tried to help empower my team and to let go, because I'm a perfectionist on things, to let go and let them shine and just provide, feedback where needed instead of trying to micromanage as well. So look at you.
You may need to carry it if you're not
It
watching.
is. So that's an area of growth for me, but it was conscious. And by doing that, we've really been able to accelerate our firm in the work we do and the clients. It all connects to what's meaningful for the company, the team, them as individuals, and then me as leading the organization. So that's something
Love
very
it.
small, but something I'm very proud of, because it took a lot.
No,
It only took over 40 years, but it took a lot.
no, and I love that thank you, again, unscripted trends, but I love that you shared that, because in both Pride Leadership and Your Career, when I talk about courage and courageousness, that is absolutely one of the examples is delegation.
Yeah.
Because that is, at its foundation, if I'm delegating a task to somebody, that's because I trust
Yes.
them. And so kudos to you. Well done. And I think it's really cool. This ties into the
Well,
courage thing.
thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Steve, for your time, your updates. We're going to have to do this again. We got to make it an annual date or
All right.
something, because
Next book,
check in.
book time.
But thank you seriously for what you're providing to the community and answering questions that are top of mind for a lot of individuals that are out there that they're struggling with. And you provide that psychological safety for them to ask questions to help create a plan to help better themselves. So thank you for the work you do.
Yes. Thank
All
you.
right. And thank you too, listeners, for joining another episode of Lead at the Top of Your Game. As you know, I always ask for you to subscribe if you haven't already, and please share the podcast with just one friend, because by doing so, you will empower them too to also lead at the top of their game. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week. Bye-bye. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we help you lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. You can check out the show notes, additional episodes, bonus resources, and also submit guest recommendations on our website at leadyourgamepodcast.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn by searching for the name Karen Rhodes, with Karen being spelled Karan. And if you like the show, the greatest gift you can give would be to subscribe and leave a rating on your podcast platform of choice. This podcast has been a production of Shockingly Different Leadership, a global consultancy which helps organizations execute their people, talent development, and organizational effectiveness initiatives on an on-demand project or contract basis. Huge thanks to our production and editing team for a job well done. Goodbye for now.